Now, look, you have obviously been but not obviously, you've been in Iran for the last 2 weeks. It's just why you haven't been on the UK Column News. We did have a report from you from Iran 2 weeks ago. But I wanted to start off this segment just with a short excerpt from one of the reports on Channel 4 News last night talking about Iran. And that leads into some stuff that you've got for us. So let's begin by having a quick look at this.
Every Friday for months now, this remote city has seen huge crowds turn out, protesting against Iran's regime. Elsewhere in the country, the movement, sparked by the death in custody of a young woman arrested for not wearing her headscarf correctly, has slowed in the face of a brutal response. In Zahedan, they're still going, but locals say the crackdown is intensifying. One woman sent us a message describing the atmosphere.
At every junction, there are strict checkpoints. There are many different vehicles patrolling the streets, monitoring the situation. In the last month, innocent people have been beaten up and arrested. They want to terrorize the protesters and cause fear. But despite this, people take part in the Friday protests and are determined to carry on.
Security forces killed around 100 people on a single day in Zahedan last September. The protests began in solidarity with others elsewhere in Iran, but also focused on the alleged rape of a teenage girl by a local police commander. As the dead bodies piled up, the massacre became known as Bloody Friday.
So that's just a short excerpt. Vanessa, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it's obviously difficult to keep up with the tsunami of information that's being poured out by not only Western media outlets like Channel 4, BBC, but also the Gulf funded, the Western funded, like BBC Farsi, like a huge number of media channels that are publishing in Farsi to deliberately mislead and misinform the Iranian people. And that was pointed out to me during my 2-week trip. I also have to make clear that I was in Iran for 2 weeks. I traveled I spent some time in Tehran. I then went to Isfahan, to Shiraz. I didn't see any sign of protests whatsoever during my time. I saw, as I think my video showed, a high degree of women walking around without even a headscarf on, some wearing kind of hippie beatnik hats, some semi-scarved, some, of course, wearing the chador and wearing the hijab. But that all of the women were mingling together in the various bazaars, in the various streets and shopping malls that I visited, which sort of slightly contradicts the hyperbole that's being put out by the likes of the BBC, Channel 4, and all the various other CNNs and so on. And that's kind of what I wanted to go through today, because, yes, targeting individual stories like these is difficult on an ongoing basis, just as it was difficult at the beginning of the war against Syria to actually keep up with the level of storytelling that has been going on. But what I wanted to do today is to demonstrate how many of these stories, when they're actually investigated, are proven to be false. So first of all, someone sent me yesterday this story recently in from the BBC: Iran dancing couple given 10-year jail sentence. Now, immediately when you read the title, of course, the Iran, in inverted commas, dancing couple are presented as nothing more than people who are objecting to the Iranian government policies. But the reality is, when I spoke to Setara Siddiqui, who I've already interviewed, she told me that as far as she knew, the jail sentence was 5 years. She's checking for me at the moment whether that has been increased.
Well, sorry, Vanessa, sorry to interrupt. I'll just mention it's common these days, and it's one of the things that I find particularly disingenuous. It's common these days for the mainstream press, if you've got multiple people involved in some kind of legal criminality, and then there's a prison sentence, they just add up all the numbers. So the two people, they're two dancers, probably got 5 years each, and that becomes a 10-year jail sentence.
Good point. Yes. And of course, not mentioned in the BBC article at all, people can go and check it for themselves, is the fact that this couple had established an Instagram account from which they had, I think, around 1 million followers, and they were instigating protests and calling for violence against the government, which in any country would be deemed as a criminal offense. Now, I recommend that everybody goes to Grayzone and reads the article by Setara Siddiqui and Christopher Reaver, who have set up the Tales Twice Told podcast, which you can find on YouTube. But this article goes into some depth into the fake stories that are circulating around Iran. And I have to say, talking about Twitter, when I started sharing this and sharing some of the fake stories out of it, I was immediately mobbed on Twitter by what I can describe as the typical kind of Syria NAFO trolls that have been attacking. NAFO trolls have been attacking on Ukraine information. And I had a very similar Twitter storm at the minute that I started questioning the stories that are being put out on social media and in mainstream media. So let's have a look at a couple of those stories. Again, I would recommend everybody goes and reads the article because it's very revealing. So first of all, people will probably remember the story of Elnaz Rekabi, who had been competing in South Korea. She was a climber, and her hijab fell off during the competition. And that then instigated an entire sort of melee of reports claiming that she had disappeared post the competition, that she had been arrested because she was competing without head covering. And of course, the BBC jumped on it. This was one headline that they put out in December 2022. The family home of the Iranian climber demolished. Now, in the article itself, they go into greater detail. But let's have a look at Rohala Rezvi, an activist and journalist that I know very well inside Iran, who immediately put out a statement saying, well, it wasn't a family home, it was a resort. It wasn't her actual property, but her brother's property. It was not destroyed for any political reason, but due to illegal construction in the first place. And the destruction took place on the 11th of June, 2022, so months before the recent events and not related to the events at all. Then let's have a look at Justin Trudeau and a number of other high-profile personalities like Elijah Wood, the actor, putting out the statement that Canada denounces the Iranian regime's barbaric decision to impose the death penalty on nearly 15,000 protesters. These brave Iranians were fighting for their human rights, and we continue to stand united in support of them and united against the regime's heinous actions. No mention, of course, of Canada's heinous actions during COVID and post-COVID. But let's look at where this story actually originated. So Omid Memarian, outrageous after killing hundreds of protesters on the streets and violent crackdown. MPs in Iran called the protesters Mohareb. As Setara and Chris will explain in the article, Mohareb actually stands for violent thugs, loosely translated. and actually applies to the ISIS attacks that took place in Shiraz in October. So this tweet, I think, was put out on November the 6th, so about 10 days after the attack on Shah al-Shiraz shrine in Shiraz. So it was clearly related to ISIS. Both of these commentators, by the way, have strong ties to the US State Department. They are not based inside Iran, although their tweets do give the impression that they are inside Iran. And Karim Sajjadpour, in the last 8 weeks, Iran's regime has killed over 300 protesters, imprisoned nearly 15,000, threatened to execute hundreds more, yet Iran's women's persist. Now, in the article, this story is completely discredited. Evidence is given to counter what they were putting out. And as I say, both figures are connected to the US State Department. Then let's have a look at this very emotional tweet that came out in September 2022. The blood of all these innocent young women is on the hands of every man and woman that voted for and continue to support the mass murderer Ibrahim Raisi and the IRGC Basij militia thugs. And then the caption at the bottom, saddest thing I've ever seen in my life, a father who promised his daughter he will dance at her wedding, now dancing at her grave after she was killed by Iranian regime in the protests. Very emotional messaging here, but let's have a look at what it really is. This man is an actor I personally know, put out by, I think this is an Azerbaijan account. It's an Azerbaijan drama. He gives you the YouTube link. And this scene is from a famous TV drama, Ata Otragi, Hearth of the Father, aired 4 years ago. Meanwhile, I interviewed in Shiraz the mother of one of the young men that was killed in the Shah al-Shiraz massacre, where I think 15 were killed. Many more were injured when 3 non-Iranian nationals with the organization ISIS opened fire on pilgrims at the shrine in Shiraz. And a note that I want to make here is that when the US State Department and the UK government heard of this massacre, they didn't put out a statement. What did they do in reality? They then amplified the Mahsa Amini story rather than actually focusing in on the genuine destabilization project that is going on inside Iran, of course, funded and orchestrated by the West, by Israel. And then what I actually want to show here is very much how Israel is orchestrating some of the destabilization in Iran, not only directly through Mossad operatives, which is a well-known fact inside Iran, everyone will talk to you about that, but also through the MEK, through ISIS, through any number of methods to actually carry out attacks against Iranians, Iranian high-profile figures, scientists, academics. We know that assassinations have been carried out by so-called Mossad agents. But let's have a look at this. So I want to show the progress of an event and of relations between Azerbaijan and Iran when it is effectively, in my view, and it is clearly shown that Israel has a hand in this sequence of events. So in December 2022, Azerbaijan was putting out statements that it will not allow Israel to attack Iran from its soil. At the same time, in January, so on January the 11th, 2023, Israel, by the way, is the primary weapon supplier to the Azerbaijan regime that has been carrying out continuous war crimes against Armenian territory and against Armenian military on Armenian territory, so not Armenian military that has entered Azerbaijan territory, but actually attacking Armenian territory. Now, if Azerbaijan get control of Armenian territory, that puts effectively Israel by proxy on the border with Iran. So that is the importance of Azerbaijan and the war against Armenia to Israel. So in January, Azerbaijan appoints first ambassador to Israel amid tensions with Iran. Remember, previously in December, Azerbaijan was saying it would not allow attacks against Iran from its soil. And then while I was actually in Iran on January the 27th, there was a shooting at the Azerbaijan embassy in Tehran, which spikes tensions. All of these reports, by the way, came from the Cradle media, if people want to check them out. Now, the attack was apparently the husband of a wife who had allegedly been detained at the Azerbaijani embassy and who decided to take justice into his own hands and killed the head of security and injured 2 other security guards in the attack. Then we get to Azerbaijan, literally a few days later, blasts Iran for opposing international obligations days after the embassy attack. So what we're seeing here, we're going from in December last year, Azerbaijan saying that it will not allow Israel to attack Iran from its territory, to now Azerbaijan blasts Iran for opposing international obligations. And then suddenly Azerbaijani security forces arrest 39 linked to Iranian espionage network in Azerbaijan. At the same time, of course, an attack is carried out on January the 30th, 2023 against an Isfahan Iranian weapons factory. The actual protection on the roof of the ammunitions factory protected it from the 3 drone strike. And I believe 2 of the drones were actually intercepted. But this is a direct attack. I don't believe Israel has claimed a responsibility for it yet, but there have been statements in Israeli media, particularly from the defense ministry, that suggests that they are responsible. And at the same time, of course, an Iranian food truck convoy, and there is videos showing that there were no weapons contained in that convoy, were hit in unidentified drone strikes on the Syrian-Iraqi border. And again, the suspicion is that Israel is involved in that attack. And I'm sorry, just going back to the drone attack in Isfahan, according to the Wall Street Journal, I believe, Israel has taken responsibility, but according to later reports, it is also believed that Kurdish separatists are working in cahoots with Israel to bring weapons into Iran that are then being supplied to the violent protesters. So I think my point is here, Mike, I think, we're back, we have to be back on red alert for a severe amplification of propaganda against the Iranian government. I'm certainly not denying that there are legitimate concerns from legitimate women's rights activists in Iran, some of whom I met with and interviewed. But the sort of superimposing of Western drama, hyperbole, and propaganda designed, of course, to whip up the frenzy amongst the protesters is something that we should all be very aware of. We've seen it in Ukraine, we've seen it previously in Syria, we've seen it over COVID, and we are definitely now seeing it in Iran. And of course, we have to bear in mind the importance of Iran to the entire non-aligned axis. Syria is reliant upon Iran for oil supply, while the US is occupying Syrian oil resources in the northeast. Iran has been responsible for enabling Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq to battle ISIS, and for the Syrian Arab Army and Hezbollah to do the same anti-terrorism warfare in Syria. And of course, it is supporting Palestine against an increasingly far right extremist Israeli regime.